All right, here we go. We're getting started with day 4 of our 17-day kitchen remodel project. The night before, or the day before, we ended up pulling about a 15-hour day, at least my brother and I did. And the final thing we did the day before is pour level quick all across the floor in the kitchen to prepare for tiling. So you see we've got a nice, even, clean surface to work on here once we begin the tiling project later on in this day. The first project we wanted to get started on here, or at least the first project I'm getting started on here, is to do a little bit of electrical work. I want to seal up a couple holes. I drilled some holes through the stucco exterior to run HDMI cable and Ethernet cable, so I want to seal up some stuff, and also in the wall where the plumbing is, just some cracks, and we'd had issues with ants coming in before, so I just wanted to get everything sealed up. So here I'm just running some electrical. Also, I wanted to get the electric all figured out for the range hood and for these 2 recessed lights. Here you see I have a can of that great stuff. It's this expanding foam. So as I mentioned, I'm just sealing up some sections here across all of the baseboards and all of the areas where there may be an air gap or an area for little critters to get in or out. So yeah, I wanted to get started here on the recessed lights and just make sure I had everything all set. The previous day I had already wired these 2 dimmer switches in the wall, and so now I'm just making the final electrical connections for these recessed lights that I picked up at Home Depot. We sort of switched a lot of the lights in our house over to dimmable LED lights. They're great because they're extremely low energy usage. They last for years or decades, and they don't really produce any heat. And in Woodland Hills where we live, it gets very hot in the summer, and so it's nice to have lights that don't add to that heat. So here I just tested out the first test of the lights, and they're appearing to work. At least the first one does, and now I'm just working on getting the second one set up. Neil was off here in the beginning of the morning getting some prep work done on the other bathroom that we remodeled the floor on. So he was prepping the floor in there so we could tile in there. So here you see I have the 2 recessed lights up in the soffit box, and I've got the electrical ready for the island range hood that we're going to put in here later. And here we brought the island range hood in. I wanted to get the main brackets set just so we made sure we had everything correct up to this point before we went ahead and sheetrocked in the rest of the side of the side and the bottom of this soffit box. So here I was just reading the manual and figuring out all of these how these metal brackets go together with the island range hood. We got this island range hood on a site called Signature Hardware. I'd done a bunch of searching, and island range hoods can be very expensive. Signature Hardware seemed like they had pretty good costs for what you get. And yeah, at the end of the project, we're really happy with the range hood we chose. I think it was around a $500 range hood or so. So here I'm just working some ducting in here and using some duct tape. There's a special type of duct tape you use for ducting like this. It's this shiny silver duct tape. It's super sticky. It's meant for ducting and for lasting for years with heat and grease and all the stuff that comes with this sort of ducting. So I've got this flexible ducting in, and now I'm just working on attaching the rest of the framing for the island range hood. So I have this boxed out. It's going to be several days before we actually attach the final end of the range hood in, but I just wanted to get everything sort of blocked out. So now I'm moving on to this left wall here where the sink and the most of the cabinets come off of, and just working on an electrical project on this wall. I wanted to add another GFCI electrical box on this wall. We had 2 outlets on the left side and a couple on the right. I wanted to add some more on the left side because we have our coffee maker and an espresso maker and some other stuff. We wanted to have plenty of electric over there. And then also I'm just adding another electrical line that will run out in the cabinet peninsula. We're going to have a bar that we're adding on, and the peninsula is a little longer than it was, and so I'm adding another outlet that's going to run to the end of the peninsula as well as a separate line for a wine fridge that we're going to put in, and a line for the range that we're going to have there too. So I just had to make some adjustments. And then also this light you see that's on in the upper left, that I'm going to later convert to into that line is going to turn into a line for a bunch of cabinet lights. So I just had a bunch of electrical work I wanted to get done at the beginning of this day. And you see at this point here, we're clearing out, and the second part of this day we wanted to get tile down, or at least get started on one big section of the tile. So we decided to go with a diagonal tile pattern here to add a little more interest than just having a straight pattern. Since Neil's a part-time tile contractor, he's a pro who's been doing this for years, so it's no issue for him to switch it up and go diagonal here. And he thought that would be a good idea too, to make the room a little more interesting, to juxtapose all of the cabinetry and stuff running parallel or perpendicular to the walls. So here we decided to lay out the room based on this edge. Neil has decided that this would be the best one to lay it out on, and at this point we're running he's running these red chalk lines. And this layout stage is really important in making sure that the later stages of the tiling go very quickly and smoothly. So we're running these lines and basically creating these boxes, that each of the boxes, and it's sort of hard to see at this point, but you'll see in just a second, each of these boxes is exactly the size of a 2x2 grid of tiles plus the grout lines associated with that 2x2 grid. And so we're progressing across the room here. Neil's doing all these measurements and making sure we get this perfect grid. We're using a little bit of Pythagorean theorem here, some a squared plus b squared equals c squared, busting out that great old math from your fifth grade geometry class here, just to make sure he's double checking and making sure we're perfectly square, we went back and made sure it was all exact. So at the end of this, we've got this perfect pattern now of squares, and each one of these squares fits, as you can see, a perfect 2x2 tile pattern plus the grout lines, and it's exact to that exact amount of space for those grout lines too. So everything will be even. So at this point, we've done this layout phase, and now Neil is just setting out the tiles, and he's out making runs out to his tile saw and go ahead and making all of these diagonal cuts across this edge here. And so he goes back and forth many times here, and he's going to go ahead and make a ton of cuts. This is all prep work before we ever get the thin set out, and before he starts actually laying the tile. This prep work goes in, and by doing the prep work, then once you start actually laying the tile and get the thin set out, it goes very quickly. And there you saw Neil showing off his Rockstar beverage, his poison of choice for when he's working crazy jobs like this. We were going 13, 14, 15-hour days a lot of this project, so I think he consumed a lot of that. I consumed a lot of coffee, and kept us going. But here you see Neil's got cuts made on a lot of these diagonals, and we're just progressing along really nice here. So I think this day ends up going another 14 or 15 hours. So yeah, Neil's got all this, all the method for marking the tiles perfectly, and he basically, it's one cut per tile here, and he gets it perfect every time. I would be spending a lot more time on this, I'm quite sure. So now he's got this pretty big section laid out. We decided basically to go ahead and try to just tile about half the room in this day. We just wanted to get enough tile down that we'd be able to focus on finishing up this wall that's open up, and then get started on cabinets sooner. I think it still ends up being another day or two after that we start actually laying the cabinets, but we wanted to get down this first section of tile as soon as possible, just so whenever we're ready to start with the cabinets, we'll be all set on that. And then also, yeah, we're gonna have to grout this too before we put the cabinets down, so that's another step. And there's a lot of order of operations we had to think about while we were doing this project to make sure everything has an amount of time that it needs to dry or set. And so we were trying to plan out everything as far as, okay, well, what's the most stuff we could get done for the day, and what strategically do we want to be working on at the end of the night so it can dry overnight or set overnight, or that type of thing. So here Neil's got pretty much all of the tiles all cut. Oh yeah, we're working on there's this little channel here he was just working on. So we were running a water line to the fridge. That was one thing we didn't have before, was a water line going to the fridge, and it always bugged me. So we decided we'll just run a water line under this threshold between the tile and the hardwood. Of course, it ended up taking more time than we expected. There was several issues that we ran into both on this day and other days. But at this point, he's just making some tile cuts, I believe. And now he's laying out the tile, and we're ready to get started here, or he's ready to get started with laying these tiles. So I think he's outside right now mixing some thin set. It's about 8 o'clock, it looks like. All right, so now he's just moving the tiles out of the way. He's got thin set mixed up, and here he goes. So as you can see, he's very methodical in this. He usually is laying out a 2x2 square of thin set, and he's got very good trowel work here. It's always a perfect height, and he's able to very quickly progress through this section because of all the layout work that's done. There's no guesswork. There's really no double checking at this point and making sure, are you going off by a 1/16 of an inch, every 4 tiles or something. We know that everything's exact because of all the layout work that's been done with this red chalk grid. So yeah, he's progressing right along here. It sure looks like this is a quick process, and actually this part of it is. So I think he's finding a couple little minor bumps or random things to remove here. But yeah, he goes along still and checks to make sure everything is in line, just checking to make sure that the grout joints are going to be the same all around. I think we had dinner right about now. It's already probably about 8, 9 o'clock at this point, I think. Maybe even later. And so here at this point, I just start help expediting. He's doing the trowel work with the thin set, and I'm just helping to set the tiles in place and make sure the grout lines are good. He's got all the corner pieces. We were lucky too that if you see where this passage to the dining room is, the tiles came out. They were like basically we laid out the room based on the other side of the room, and it just so happened that all of the tiles were perfect 45-degree halfway cuts between the tiles at the doorway there. So here we're progressing very fast now. He's laying out all the thin set, and I'm just helping lay the tiles. I was just showing off my red hands, doing a little red rum. And I think this is basically the last planned section that we have for the day for tiling here. Just moving right across. Sorry about the crack. All right, and there we go. So yeah, we got about half of the room here tiled now. Just checking out all the rest of the room. We got the soffit box in, and I think that's about it for this day. So we were exhausted at this point, I know. And yeah, it's 10:25, and that's it for day 4. So check out day 5 for the continuation.